Welcome to this episode of the Voices for Voices TV show and podcast. I am your host, founder, and executive director of Voices for Voices, Justin Allen Hayes. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, as well as our over 230 other episodes in our catalog. If you're able to like, subscribe, all those things, they're free. So we'd appreciate that, and we appreciate each and every one watching and listening, whether this is your first episode. If this is your first episode, you're going to want to go to the prior episode to catch part one of our conversation with our guest on this episode. Or if you've been with us from the beginning, or if you've shared, screenshot, we appreciate. However, we're able to get the word out and really comes in line with our guest. Again, this is part two. Check out part one as well with her. Very interesting. Really from an early age, experiences that she was experiencing as a child and as she was growing up with the family and with her relationship that and ended with divorce and uh, really I'm saying it's like kind of like two halves, I guess. And so this half is after divorce, finding finding her footing, finding her way to be a voice, to share her experiences, to help others, and it doesn't hurt to obviously catch the attention of somebody like Christy Brinkley, who's an actress and supermodel, who has said about our guest Tina Whippen and her One Mom's Battle movement. Quote, you no longer need to go through the ordeal of divorcing a narcissist alone. Through this battle, Tina Swithin is a beacon of clarity. You will realize that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and someday you will start to whisper, thank you to the darkness, thank you to the pain, the fear, the struggle, even thank you to the narcissist, because in the darkness, you will find light you never knew you had inside your heart, strength you never imagined. End quote. Uh, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest joining us from California, and that is Tina Swithin. Thank you for joining us on this episode, as well as the first part.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Great. Uh, so social media, it's a huge way of communicating with individuals across the world. And in some ways, a lot of ways, it's been very helpful to reach people we never would have been able to 20, 30 years ago. We'd have to do it kind of the old-fashioned way of writing letters and uh,
Smoke signals.
yeah, and hoping somebody caught it and wanted to help share it. So she mentioned that she has this what feels like a megaphone with the messages that she shares with her movement. Uh, so if we could maybe pick up the conversation and kind of end of the divorce, and then get into what One Mom's Battle, how that started, and then we'll get into the current state and how that will obviously continue.
Yeah. I went into when my marriage came to an end, I went into the divorce, by nature, I am very a hopeful, optimistic person. And I like to see the best in people and things and situations. I went into the whole process very naive. I believed that there was a part of me, huge part of me, didn't really understand who I was up against because the mask had not completely fallen at that point. And, you truly do see who someone is during times of conflict. The first 8 months of our separation, I was still under his control. Now I can see that very clearly. It was my goal to keep things as stable for my daughters as possible. They were 2 and 4 years old. I
Mhm.
had proposed a nesting agreement where we shared the same house. He was gone working Monday through Friday. He would come home Friday night. I would leave. I was couch surfing at
Mhm.
friends' houses, my sister's house, wherever, on the weekends, because at least I knew my kids would be in their own beds. I would much rather me bounce back and forth than put my little girls through that. So, and there was a part of me that, not recognizing how dangerous he was, I was just thinking he's going to have to step up to the plate. He's going to have to be a parent, and true, because it was one of the biggest fights during our whole marriage was, why don't you connect with these little girls? Why don't you have a bond with them? Why don't you spend time with them? And he just wouldn't. I now recognize he's not capable of that. And so, that the beginning, I was just very hopeful that we would be able to co-parent, that, I didn't envision us being the people to even go into family court. I thought we could mediate, we could figure this out. And we were for quite a while, because he loved the arrangement where he knew everything I was doing. He had control still over the finances. The one thing he kept, I recognize as power and control, is I have a very rare health diagnosis, and I was dependent on health insurance to keep I do monthly IV infusions. And so
Mhm.
he carried all of the power there. And whenever I would step out of line in his eyes, he would threaten that he was going to take away my health insurance. So I was complying. And then some things, caused me concern, and I started to really find my voice, and that became a threat. So one day I went to see my sister for the weekend, about 4 hours away from where I live. And what I didn't know at the time is that he had moving vans waiting down the street. And so almost as soon as I pulled out of the driveway to leave, um, he came in and completely took everything. I mean, down to the
Mhm.
photos of my kids off the walls, videos of my kids, the material things, whatever, it can be replaced. But there are things that, he knew that I cherished, and he took everything.
Mhm.
And that's really how our divorce started off. As soon as he felt like he was losing control, it became, something I didn't even know was possible. It was World War III. It was a Category 5 divorce hurricane. I ended up, within a few weeks of that, in the women's shelter with my little girls, and afraid for my life, because he wasn't the type that was going to hit me, but I could see this really scary, dark rage in his eyes. And I knew what a threat I was to his image in our community, and that he was losing everything. He, had financially had to file bankruptcy because all of his financial schemes had caught up with him.
Mhm.
And he was in a downward spiral that terrified me. And I truly did believe that he was capable of taking my life.
Mhm.
And so I fled to the women's shelter, and I didn't have enough money to hire an attorney. So I had to, somebody who's conflict avoidant by nature,
Mhm.
going into the family court system and having to act as their own attorney, by far the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. Just trying to navigate the different court forms and what I'm supposed to submit, how many copies I'm supposed to make, how I'm supposed to serve these things to people. So overwhelming, and such a dark, humbling time in my life. Um, and I quickly learned that the court system is not there to act in the best interest of kids. When that first day when I walked in, had a false sense of hope and confidence that all I do is I tell them the truth. I tell them what's happening, that I'm in this women's shelter. I'm afraid for my life. My children are not safe. And what I was met with was a judge who basically said, "You're both crazy. If you're starting your divorce off at this level of conflict, you're both crazy." And I just remember thinking, this is the Twilight Zone. I feel like I'm in an alternate reality. This can't be happening. Um, and so I quickly learned it was, just being thrust straight into it, that it was a huge wake-up call. And I remember it was about a year into the divorce when I was desperately begging the court to protect my kids. And the judge looked at me and said, you not only chose to marry this guy, you went on to have two kids with him. He can't be that bad. And I just remember thinking, like, talk about victim blaming. But then on the other hand, I thought, well, I'm glad I know that that's his mentality, because at least I can adjust in the midst of all of this trauma, shift course and start operating with that in mind, that that is how this judge is viewing our case. And I've come to find out that's the reality of most judges. So yeah, we were in court 13 times in 1 year alone. My mentality was, I'm going to keep putting everything in front of the court every time my kids are in danger, because I need to go to sleep tonight and put my head on that pillow, knowing I've done everything that I can to protect them. And if something happens to these kids, that's on these people. These people, I am at least needing to do my part. So I became an expert at documenting. I had a police officer friend. She gave me advice in the very beginning: document everything and document more. And I didn't even know what that meant at that point.
Right.
Now I am I teach other people how to document, because it was such a critical component in me eventually protecting my kids. But for me, it was about the 2 year mark where I just thought, I don't understand this. I don't understand why these people are supposed to be acting in the best interest of kids. Yet every time I put my little girls in that car on a Friday night, I don't know if I'm ever going to see them again. I thought he was in such a dark place that he would drive them over a cliff.
Mm.
And because he knew they were the number one way to hurt me and to maintain power and control. And it was terrifying. So one day I had a break from work. I was working 3 jobs plus acting as my own attorney. I had a break and being a full-time mom. Um, I went and sat in the courtroom. I had a break from work. I just went and plopped myself down. And I remember the judge looking at me and saying, he knew me so well by that point. He said, Swithin, why are you here today? You're not on calendar. And I said, Your Honor, I am just here to observe. And that day changed my life, because I was able to see things through a different lens, that to the court, these were just business transactions. And to me, it's emotional. These are my babies. But that I needed to shift how I was presenting things. I started going to sit in the court on a regular basis. I started studying the system, studying other cases that, resembled mine. And then one day I decided to start a blog around that 2 year mark. And I called it One Mom's Battle, because no one, there was nothing. I could Google for hours and I couldn't find a single person talking about this topic. So I started the conversation originally just for my friends and family to follow along, not knowing that anyone else was out there. And about 6 months after that, I happened to have the Today Show on in the background, and Christy Brinkley was being interviewed by Matt Lauer, of all people. And which that is ironic in
Yes.
itself at this point, knowing what we know. But I never watched TV. So the fact that it was on was really weird. The fact that it happened to be this episode, I didn't know who she was, but I heard him continuing to almost berate her and say, why can't the two of you, she was going through a divorce with Peter Cook, why can't the two of you put your differences aside and get along for the sake of the kids? And I remember turning to the TV and just staring at it in disbelief, and her choking up and starting to cry and say, Google the term divorcing a narcissist. And that was really all she could get out because she was so shell shocked and traumatized by what he was doing. And I couldn't believe it because the subtitle of my blog was Divorcing a Narcissist. So overnight, my blog had 40,000 hits.
Yeah.
And I quickly discovered I was not alone and that
Mm.
there were people all over the world walking through this same nightmare. Within a few days of that, Christy started sharing my blog on social media, letting people know that she followed what I was doing and that it would help them to make sense of their own journey. And then within a week of that, her assistant reached out to me, invited me down to Los Angeles to meet with her. She was doing the Broadway production of Chicago and playing Roxy Hart. And so I went down to Los Angeles. I got to meet Christy backstage, and the rest is history. She has really become, sharing the work I do. When I wrote my first book, she shared it with her community. And, she has really helped me in the background to create
Hmm.
the platform and the community that a lot of people refer to as a lifeline. Um, in my own custody case, it took 6 years for me to protect my kids. 2 custody evaluations, minors counsel, dozens of police interactions, CPS investigations, and my kids were failed so many times in so many ways. The court finally got it, but I think I'm one of the lucky ones. Most
Hmm.
people aren't able to successfully protect their kids in this system. And when I think back to what I went through as a child, and I struggle with the word resilience because it's a word that I have a mixed relationship and feelings about or with because kids shouldn't have to be resilient. We're as a society, we need to be protecting our kids and treating them with care and love. But what I went through as a child, I do believe gave me a voice, made me an advocate, instilled in me that we don't give up and I'm a
Mm.
fighter. And so, I was able to protect my kids and I will never take that for granted. I also think had they listened to me on day one, my
Hmm.
kids would have been spared 6 years of trauma because the thing is, my story never changed. It was the same on day one as it was, 6 years into it. And so, my kids went through things and experienced abuse that they should have been protected from. And so that fuels me to do the work I do today and to, um, give kids a voice. I have teenagers from all around the world reach out to me on a regular basis and share their stories and ask me to amplify their voices because no one's hearing them and no one's protecting them, and the system is failing them. And so, I've developed this community, this platform over a period of, I think it's been about 13 years now. And we have chapters all over the world. And we do our best to shine a spotlight on the darkness of the family court system because my case is not unique. And I feel that the court system has progressively gotten worse year after year. You've got a lot of people who have, it's almost like a multi-level marketing scheme that
Hmm.
has taken shape in the family court system with people who are profiting tens of thousands of dollars off of keeping litigation alive and adding fuel to it. They aren't in there trying to like really have people come to an agreement or to truly act in the best interest of children because that stops the money flow. And
Yeah.
so I am, until for as long as I'm doing this work, I'm going to hold a megaphone and a really bright spotlight and expose what is happening because it's child trafficking. A lot of what we see happening in family court, it's evil.
It really is. And you just mentioned the child trafficking, and that you talk about reunification camps. There's
Yeah.
all kind of stories and experiences. We had a guest on prior who was basically taken from church by the pastor, saying that the 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 dad was no longer living, and the mom was there, and they took her son, saying that she was uh, abusing him, and 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 the pastor, and it doesn't have to be a pastor, but just in this instance, they in the town that they live in, it's everybody from the police investigators go to the one church, and they wouldn't they wouldn't do anything because they're like, oh no, that's my pastor, we're going to believe the pastor, not somebody else. Uh, and and that individual, luckily, he was able to uh, escape and get away, but there were many other children uh, that he had saw, and it was just terrifying to know that certain people in certain areas, they have the power, and people like you and me, just kind of like average people, that like you said, you had to go through 6 years of a battle and if you would have quit or stopped at any point, the courts wouldn't have really they probably wouldn't have cared. They would just went on as like business as usual. And I think that's big for people to hear, uh, when you're passionate, and right, when you're talking about kids, especially, you're not going to stop trying and fighting until we're either not living, or until something actually happens positive. And I think that's a very important lesson and thought from your experience. And you're still probably going through trauma and flashbacks at different times, and your daughters, and it's just really it's hard to you know look back at situations, and it's like you said, if on day one, then 6 years later, your daughters and yourself, and you don't have to spend all this time and energy uh, trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this the right way, and how to those are like attorneys, and with us, especially myself, not being an attorney, you're just trying to learn and do as much as you can, and that really fuels the work that uh, what we do, and especially what work you do. And I was going to ask you, like, what gets you up in the morning and keeps you uh, doing the work that you do, but and you can answer that, but having that passion and fuel, and being through those experiences, and now knowing that you're not alone, that there's others, that those are probably a few things that are keep you doing what you're doing.
Yeah. No, my why is my daughters. If they go on to have children, I want this to be exposed. I want this cycle to be brought to an end before that happens, before their friends go on to have kids. Other kids, I have two grandsons for my stepson. I don't want my kids, my grandsons to continue out in this. I hope one day we see a system that is truly prioritizing kids. My why is the parents that I have been able to help. There are success stories. There are, every once in a while, I'll get an email from a judge or a family court professional who says, thank you for doing the work you're doing. Thank you for exposing, the corruption. Thank you for and that gives me hope that there are still some people out there. Um, and accountability when I see these professionals
Hmm.
who are, profiting off of people's trauma. And and fueling the litigation, when I see them held accountable, because accountability is not something we see a lot of in family court. I think if the everyday citizen knew what was happening in family court, we would have everyone around the United States linking arms with us in outrage. And that's really what we need, because this is a system that has no oversight, no regulation. You know, people will say, oh, if you don't agree with the decision, go appeal it. That is so unrealistic. First of all, appeals are incredibly expensive and they're rarely successful. You know, you're asking colleagues of a judge to rule against that person, which is then a negative mark on that judge's record. They just don't do it. It is very rare for there to be any type of accountability. So until something changes, I'm going to keep using my platform to expose the judges who are failing kids. You know, there's a judge in Colorado, most people would be shocked to know this. Two of her rulings have resulted in two different children from two different families being murdered. And she is still on the bench. You can literally hand down a ruling that results in a child's death and show up to work the next day and continue your reign of terror with no accountability at all. That is horrifying, and it should outrage everyone. You know, what is happening, I really do believe when it is finally exposed, it will be the scandal of our lifetime.
Yeah, and that's another reason I was hoping to have you on as a guest to uh, continue exposing
Yeah.
what is happening, and with some of the judges, it might be related, like you said, profiting money, continuing
Yeah.
their reign on the bench. And well, this is what my colleagues are doing. So if I go, like you said, for appeals, if I go against them, then it's going to look negatively on me. And so people just go, the judges, they just go on just like nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
And to
And,
that,
and if you speak up against them, you're going to be met with a gag order or you're going to be silenced. It is shocking that my judge, actually, the one, you know, in addition to finally protecting my kids, he did honor my right to free speech. And it was a constant topic in the courtroom about my blog, about me speaking out. I believe it made everyone sit up a little bit straighter. You know, did I take a huge risk? Yes. And I didn't even know it was a risk at that time. Now, you know, when parents want to speak out, I tell them you really have to weigh it out, because if you speak out, you risk a gag order and then you're silenced and things are going to get even worse. You're going to see retaliatory judicial rulings that could make you lose your kids completely. So, you know, it's do as I say, not as I do. You know, unfortunately, it's a huge risk that I took, and it worked out, you know, well for me. But you know, and that is something I will also never take for granted, and that's why I use my platform to expose injustice and to give others a voice when they have been silenced, because most people are silenced.
yeah, and that's, uh, I mean, it's just really terrifying. Like you mentioned, the ruling the judge can give, it can literally be a death sentence for
Yeah.
children, and that for anybody, but for children, it's just uh, it's intense. Can you talk a little bit about the retaliatory? And I don't know if you've had people other than judges that have said negative things about you and the work that you've done, because we're finding with well, you know, obviously certain topics ruffle more feathers than others, but you know,
Yeah.
we're finding with some topics where there's people that very strongly oppose. You know, why are you exposing this? Why are you talking about this? And and my, I guess part of my belief is if there are people that are against it, it must mean you're doing something right. Uh, have you had any, I don't know, just people are like, oh, you know, Tina or one mom's battle.
Yeah, lots. I take my personal safety and the safety of my family very seriously because, very recently in this past year, I've had death threats against
Mm,
me. And not even hidden, cryptic death threats, but blatant online people who we can trace and then trace their criminal history and how scary these individuals are. So
oh my,
these are credible, scary threats. Um, I'm remarried. My husband has had to get a concealed carry permit because
mm,
of our safety issues. We have cameras, we have an alarm system, measures that I would have never
mm,
normally taken because I live in a very safe community in California, and that's not a typical fear of most people in my area.
mm,
But I'm threatening and exposing a probably $100 billion industry. I have no idea what the value truly is, but there's so many of these. You mentioned reunification therapy, reunification treatments, camps. This is unregulated experimental treatments. Our kids are not guinea pigs.
mm,
And, these people can charge $40,000 for 4 days of these programs. So when I say they are using childhood trauma for revenue streams, we're talking a lot of money. And so I am very much a threat to their industry and what this multi-level marketing scheme they've been created. They only target families who have the financial resources. A lot of people have a misconception that if you have money, you're better able to protect your kids. I will tell you, I would much rather walk into the system the way I did without a penny to my name
mm.
because I was able to protect my kids. Had I had financial resources, even if it's college accounts, I've seen judges order people to cash out their children's college accounts to pay
Oh,
for these experimental reunification treatments and programs. That is the level of collusion and corruption that we're talking about. I am so grateful I had no money,
yeah.
Um, I still recognize my privilege. I know just being a white woman in this system, I am much more privileged than most. There are lots of issues in the system. Our marginalized communities are at an even greater disadvantage, regardless of income. So lots of issues, and exposing them, exposing all of these issues comes at a great risk, and it can be scary.
Yeah, it's I'd say it's not for the weary of heart.
No.
And you have to have that drive and fire to do it, to continue and just to
I've seen
take
people
things.
come and go, people. So over the years, so many people, it's a revolving door of advocacy. People come in,
Mm,
guns blazing, the best of intentions, they're for the right reasons. They last 3, 4 years at the most because, you know, I I don't know what it is, about me, but I do think it does have to do with I've been a fighter since came into this world,
mm.
and yeah.
Okay, well, we're unfortunately getting close to the end of our time on this second part. Can you share how people can learn about your movement? They volunteer. I don't know how it works, but you can give your plugs however you want. Oh, your books as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I all of my books are on Amazon. Tina Swithin, my last name is easy. It's the word within with an
Mm,
S before it, so you can Google me. My main book is Divorcing a Narcissist, One Mom's Battle, and that tells my whole story from start to finish. And then onemomsbattle.com is the resource hub for whether you want to get involved in legislative action or find a community support or online courses, any of that. We're kind of a one-stop place for everything family court related.
excellent. And thank you for what you have and what you are doing from uh, human to human, exposing and bringing some hard topics and experiences to the table. It does bring uh, some, I'll say, the haters, but I also look at it, any celebrity or entertained, or that no matter how popular they are, there's always going to be people that they don't like them for whatever reason. And I'm not a celebrity, so like I have to expect that there's probably going to be some people, especially when you're talking about people's livelihoods and yeah, and when you're trying to take take their job and what they have been doing, which isn't good. And then that's when people get like really fired up, and it's fighters like you that are really making a difference here uh, here I'll say locally, like in the United States, but sounds like globally as well, that people are have learned about the movement, and I really just want to thank you big time for being on the show, because it's a privilege to have someone like yourself that is a fighter, that is trying to make change on the big level as well as the local level.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you for the work you're doing and for the invitation. I'm really, really grateful to connect and to share your message as well.
Thank you. And for our viewers, our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't checked out the first part of our interview with One Mom's Battle, Swithin, please go back and check that out. And just grateful to have people like Tina that are coming out and exposing and wanting the best for all human beings, but especially when we're talking about children. So until next time, we hope that you're a voice for yourself or somebody in need. Thank you.